Okay, so I've been asked to talk about the role of community participation and related aspects in dealing with the climate crisis, um, and I should first of all explain the context of this picture here. This is a woodcut from a book that's really important to me by Jean Giono, and it's called The Man Who Planted Trees. And what I'm trying to do here actually is talk partly about really planting trees, but mostly about how I might encourage you to think differently and develop your own understandings of how you might work with people in this context. And I've chosen quite a long title, but I'll explain that in a moment. So I want to give you a general introduction associated with me and my background, a little bit on the climate crisis. Many of you will know a lot about this, the related biodiversity crisis, sustainable development as a concept, and then the notions of trust, leadership and followership, not a term that people use very much, and then a little bit more on community approaches. And then I'm really concerned that we make sure that we look after ourselves, and I want to talk a bit about that. So first of all, my context. So you can see up here, it's the University of Edinburgh where I work, and one of the big global universities with about 30,000 students. And I work in Edinburgh. You can see where that is if you don't know already, in Scotland, and much of my focus is on Scotland, but also the UK. But I have quite a broad responsibility internationally as well. Now, these are the kinds of things that I do. I work on master's programs. I've already taught one master's course this year with some lovely students from all over the world. We do doctoral studies and some undergraduate things as well. So a broad range of different elements to my work. But I also work, as Fumiko-san said, with the UN recognized regional center of expertise in sustainable development education. And I have some other responsibilities policy-wise. Now, this is a picture of my grandparents. Now, not many people show you pictures of their grandparents, but I want you to know a couple of things. I'm the only person in my family ever to go to a university to study, and here I am, a professor in the University of Edinburgh. How did that happen? Well, it happened through education, and so you won't be surprised to hear that this is a really key element of my work and my presentation today. And I also want you to know that I was made from potatoes from this garden. And it's important to know where you were made from and what you were made from. And for me, the idea of where our food comes from and how we survive in this world is crucially important. So that's just a bit about background, but we talk about climate change, but of course we know that there's a climate crisis. And I just want to focus on three, I think, very beautiful ideas that science brings us. And the first of these, and some of this will be very familiar to you, is that, of course, CO2 is increasing globally. And over the period of this diagram, in the last 5 years, we can see the general trend, the black line. But what I really love in this is that the parts per million of CO2 go up and down, up and down, up and down every year. Now, why is that? Well, it is because the planet breathes. And of course, most of the vegetation on the planet is in the northern hemisphere because there's more land. And because there's more land, and in the northern hemisphere, many of the trees are deciduous, they lose their leaves in winter. This shows the pattern of carbon dioxide uptake and, again, the drop over the winter period. So this reminds me that actually our planet is breathing, and we need to harness what the plants do to help sustain us. Now, you're very familiar with figures like this, and all I really need to say here is that, as a reminder, that we have the data, and we've had the data for a very long time, and we know fine that we're locked into global climate temperature increases, whether or not we stop all carbon dioxide emissions right now. And it's partly around the nature of science, that science is about collecting data, and part of our job is to use that to communicate. Again, we know that we're losing ice, but why does it really matter? Well, it matters because on a hot day you wear light clothes, and on a cool day you wear dark clothes. And ice cover, of course, reflects sunlight energy. So we have a big feedback loop here, where the more ice we lose, the more the oceans absorb heat and the greater the effect on temperature of the planet. And of course, that leads to more ice melting. Now, these three concepts together link the green stuff and the white stuff and the blue stuff. And actually, in all, these are three major drivers of our understanding of why climate change is the issue that it is today. Now, I have to point out that Scotland was the place where the development of the steam engine took place through James Watt, and then the distilling of paraffin from coal and oil shales. And we were the first place to do deep mine coal and deep sea oil exploration. So actually, Scotland is probably responsible for most of the global climate change that's ever taken place. So for that, I apologise. But it's a serious issue. We know how we did this, and we know what to do to change it. Okay, moving on then. Related to this is the biodiversity crisis. And of course, this has become a much bigger issue in public profile in recent years. And I just want to say a couple of things here. First of all, again, we know what we are doing. This isn't an extinction, really. It's not a natural event. It is an extermination. We know that we're destroying life on planet Earth. And actually, that knowledge should make us take seriously the decisions that we make now. But with that comes hope, because of course, as I've said, the planet is breathing. We have blue stuff, we have white stuff, the oceans and the ice caps. And because they're intimately connected, the idea of nature-rich climate solutions has become a very prominent issue. It's something I've been involved in for a good many years now. So we need to look after our carbon sinks. That's forests, that's mangroves, that's the oceans, and that's these big peatland areas that I work on in Scotland and beyond. So a little now on sustainable development. And we're very familiar with these sustainable development goals. I prefer to think of those as part of a broader issue where there are these major drivers. I thank Philip for passing this image on to me, but we know that we've got sustainable development goals for 2015 to 2030, but as we all know, COVID has come in and changed our perspective on these SDGs, and I think our attention has been diverted for some time now. So COVID's a big issue, and global economic recession is what is occupying the minds of politicians. But climate change is, we know, much bigger in the long run, and the collapse of biodiversity is clearly a bigger issue than even climate change, because without biodiversity, we lose one of the main ways in which we can actually bring about positive change. Now, these things are not simple to address. We need, first of all, to acknowledge that they're complex interdisciplinary issues. And I like the use of this term wicked issues or wicked problems. Wicked problems are, as it says here, difficult or impossible to solve because of the incomplete, contradictory and changing requirements, which are difficult to recognize. And because of these complex interdependencies, trying to solve one aspect of a big issue actually can make another worse. Climate change, biodiversity loss is exactly one of these. And a simple way of voicing this is to say that actually you have to be quite smart to realize that you can't solve these issues simply. And that's an important and quite fundamental idea. Now, many wicked issues exist out there, and they're not all sustainability issues, but all sustainability issues are people issues. And whatever we do when we think about the ways in which we're trying to address climate change, biodiversity loss, we have to recognize that people are at the core of this. And we have to work with people in order to bring about change. Now, I much prefer this view of the SDGs, and there's, of course, two ways to look at this. If you're an economist, you'll say, well, look, you need to get the economy right, and then you can sort society, and then, well, the biosphere can look after itself. You might not be surprised that I think of things entirely the other way around, that we do need to look after the biosphere because it sustains us and all other life. If you are in any doubt about that whatsoever, I invite you to try to hold your breath for 4 minutes and see how long you can manage. Because, of course, every breath we take comes from the biosphere, from the plants, both on land and in water, that provide the oxygen and soak up the CO2 that we produce. And then try managing a day without drinking water and a week without eating food, and you'll soon realize how dependent we are. So I think we need to get the biosphere stuff sorted alongside society and economy. Okay, so that's all sort of background stuff. Let me move on to trust, leadership and followership here. So trust is a big issue, and particularly with regard to information. And I've got some images of some people here, some of whom you'll recognize. We have big oil, and we know that big oil has been lying to us for decades about climate change. They've known, and they've made a point of not telling us. We have politicians, and these are two politicians in the top that you may or may not trust, but we need to question why politicians say what they say, they do what they do. We need to interrogate their arguments always. Down here at the bottom, we have two people who you may not think of as significant with regard to trust, unless you know a bit about them. So Mark Zuckerberg, you know, makes his money out of social media and the like. I do not trust Mark Zuckerberg at all because of the way in which his organization manages its business. And I certainly don't trust Rupert Murdoch because he runs the major news corporation in the world and has control over most of the world's media. The reason I don't trust them isn't that they're unethical, it's that they have close to a monopoly in terms of providing information. And I think it's really important that we think about where we get our information from, irrespective of what the political views are of these people and their business models are. And we wonder and muse on what might be a better model in terms of trusting with regard to information. So I'm going to give a few examples of people that maybe you trust and maybe I trust, but let's leave that to one side. So do you trust Greta? Well, many people do. And where does she get her information from? Do we trust the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change? Well, they're the best we're going to get. So maybe we need to be careful about where we get and we need to think about why we trust them and how we can communicate that to other people. David Attenborough is my ultra hero with regard to the natural world. And, you know, when he dies, I'm going to cry because he's made such a huge contribution. Now, I think in particular with regard to news and media, it's well worth thinking about who you pay for your information. And the Guardian newspaper is a newspaper I use. That doesn't really matter. But it is an independent newspaper which has a great environment section. But the point is that you pay by subscription if you want to get good news. If you get your news for free, be suspicious of it. Our World in Data is an organization that is well worth looking up on the internet. This is Hannah Ritchie, who's one of my doctoral graduates, quite the most brilliant young woman I've ever worked with. It provides factual information for free. So it's a charity. So these are the kinds of things I think you need to think about as to where you get your information, but more importantly even, how you communicate to others, how they might get theirs. So I want to talk a little about leadership and followership here. So everybody talks about leadership, and this is a program about leadership, but I think followership is just as important. So Greta started a school strike and led a movement, and then others followed, but now who's leading and who is following? If you ask Greta, I guarantee she would say that she is now following the initiatives around the world and the effort that so many people are putting into the climate strikes. Leadership is contextual. Sometimes I'm a leader. Mostly I follow. Mostly I follow the people I'm supposed to be leading because they know more about the issues, and I have to understand that and treat that with respect. And it's a very easy thing to do when you're working with really good people. And of course, this generation this generational movement that we've seen through Greta and the school strikes does not allow older people like me to say that it's up to you now, it's you young people that need to sort this stuff out. And I like this quote of Tremel, you know, each generation has a duty not to engage in the wishful thinking that the problem can be left for descendants to solve. We've done that for too long. So I'm moving on now to the importance of community approaches. And I've been involved in a number of these, and I'll talk about a range of them in just a moment. But the first thing really is that for me, Leadership requires passion and belief. You need to believe in the issue that you're trying to deal with, and you need to convey that and be passionate about it. People around you, whether they're colleagues or others that you're more broadly associated with, I see that, they identify it, and they know when it's absent. Being willing to work with others and often to follow a community of interests is profoundly important, because other people know a lot more than you do about many of the issues that you might address. And in particular, collectively, they may well know more. This is one example of a policy issue, and I'm not going to talk in detail here, but essentially to say that over a period between 2011 and 17, and it now continues with other developments, we have managed to introduce learning for sustainability as a curricular requirement for all children in Scotland and all teachers in Scotland. Well, how did that come about? Well, it came about because a minister, well, not a minister even before that, a number of NGOs encouraged a minister to put in a manifesto that they would, if re-elected, do this. So an NGO group pushed to get this as part of a manifesto commitment before a national election. That led to an advisory group here called the One Planet Schools Group, and I was asked to chair that group, and we produced a report. And then we worked with the teaching professionals through the General Teaching Council, and a lot of support came from our university based UN University Regional Centre of Expertise in ESD for Scotland. And then, of course, because we're training teachers, we worked with higher education, universities and colleges. So a broad community of interests were brought together to develop this learning for sustainability approach. We came up with recommendations. They were accepted by ministers in 2012 and 2016, and it led to this report called Vision 2030 Plus, which brought together the SDGs and this idea of learning for sustainability. It was accepted by ministers of education, environment and international development. And it's, as far as I know, the only piece of policy work that's ever been accepted in Scotland by 3 ministerial responsibility areas. Now, how did that happen? Well, I've given you the sort of the technical background of this, but essentially it's like this. Imagine yourself going down a corridor and you're trying to knock on the doors of all the important people, because there are important people out there. A good idea was the first thing. It came from the NGOs. We need to do this. A sympathetic politician, a simple message. We need to learn for a sustainable future. Bringing people together in a harmonious way. Looking at the stability and capacity of civil servants and being sure that we were not over pushing the politicians or the civil servants into areas they were uncomfortable with. Working over this over a period of time, and then showing that there were demonstrable benefits to communities of interest, in this case education, and then we got the new policy. So thinking about what do all these people we need to talk to think about this issue is crucially important. Now, I want to come to, that's a policy area. Now, I want to come to a couple of practical areas here. Now, my hero, David Attenborough, said this: the only way out is to rewild the world. What he was talking about was our dependence on these planetary systems and nature-rich climate solutions. And so these 2 areas of nature-rich climate solutions and sustainability and nature education are the key elements of my professional work these days. So I want to give a couple of examples. Here's a relatively small scale one that I came across through the Nature of Scotland Awards, which I'm a judge on this awards event, which happens every year. And it's a small part of Edinburgh called Leith, where someone decided that she was really unhappy with the food that schools produce for her kids. And she decided that she would try to encourage more eating of more locally produced food. Now, Leith is a relatively poor part of Edinburgh, and there are very few places where they can actually grow food. But she started this growing food in pots and trying to get kids engaged in growing food. This led to support from a range of NGOs, eventually through the Nature of Scotland Awards, and then eventually from the University of Edinburgh giving grants. and then a bigger fund. And so now they have this area of ground you can see in the bottom left here, where they're taking young people in to grow plants and getting them to understand the importance of nature. This is a really successful project that started really small and has now got quite a high profile. And you can imagine it's really engaging both of those issues of nature, biodiversity, and of course education, as well as nutrition. Multiple benefits. Here's a much bigger scheme that I've been involved in a little bit, which is that because of the big climate change conference in Glasgow, there's been a commitment made to plant 18 million trees. So that's 10 trees for every person in the whole region of Glasgow to be planted over the next decade, over the next 10 years. 10 trees per person over 10 years. It's called the Clyde Climate Forest, and it extends well beyond Glasgow throughout the whole river basin of the River Clyde, the major river that runs through Glasgow. And you can see in the top right here that there are lots of trusts involved in this, lots of agencies, and of course Glasgow City Council, and then other agencies like the one I'm involved in, which is called Nature Scotland. And so this initiative is partly driven by policymakers, but it will not work without volunteers. And you can see in the bottom right a group of volunteers. The key thing about this is you're giving volunteers something to do. They're going out there and planting trees. And if you've never planted a tree, I really encourage you to do it, because it's something that will stay with you the rest of your life. And those people actually see the benefits of planting the trees on their local communities. So it's something that engages people, and practical engagement is far better than just intellectual engagement. Now, Fumiko-san passed this paper on to me a while back, and I was really taken with it. And it's from the World Resources Institute, or at least it's published there, and it's about climate resilience and local action. And I don't need to read it through for you, but you can see here that the paper suggests that climate adaptation is a global issue, which we know. But here's some interpretations. The effects are strongly felt at local levels, and some of you, I know, I've been talking to people today who know about this on a personal level. What's going to happen to Fiji with regard to global climate change, for example? Yet a very small proportion of funds go to local communities, and we need to try to change that. Local voices understand this vulnerability, and we need to listen. And local leadership and site-specific strategies are key. So integrated, properly planned local action can lead to these effective context-specific programs, a bit like the ones I've been talking about already. Much greater returns for local communities, so people can see the benefits and they can see that they're equitable. These holistic approaches, like nature-based climate solutions, have multiple benefits. That one, as a perfect example, has a climate benefit, it has a biodiversity benefit, it has health benefits, and community benefits. And of course, it relies upon and amplifies local knowledge. And it really takes away from the idea that some kind of expert comes into a local community and tells people what to do. It needs to be led by, and I'm going back to the notion of followership, it needs to be led by local communities. In other words, the people who think they're leading actually need to be following. Okay, I need to come back to you as individuals and your key role in all this. So I've talked about some scary stuff here, which you all know. A lot of people that you might work with don't know all this scary stuff, and you need to find ways of communicating it. In all of that, you need to be sure that you look after yourself and you look after the people you're working with. So we talk a lot about environmental footprints. One of the first things I get my undergraduate students to do is to do an environmental footprint, and they're often shocked by the impact of their of themselves on the planet, particularly flying around the world, as many of us have done a lot and we're doing less at the moment. Now, alongside the environmental footprint, I then say to them, right, you need to do an environmental handprint. You need to talk about what you can do, what change you can bring about, how you can bring about this change. Keep that in mind all the time. Yes, you know, we have impacts, we can't help that, but we need to balance this. So here are some things I hope for you. I hope that you can keep learning, and that you are always an active, hungry learner, that you're restless in your learning. You never take the information that you get on face value, that you're always digging in to try to ensure that you keep learning about and you become much better informed about the issues you deal with. The second of those fingers, make sure you're well informed. Being well informed is important, but then you need to be sure that you're confident in communicating those ideas. Making good sustainability choices is important, particularly if you present yourself as someone who is trying to make a difference in these areas. There's a lot of research that shows that people are much more interested in how you behave than what you say. People see through you in an instant if you're not authentic, if you're not real. And that actually gives you the confidence to keep working in the areas that you work in. Look after yourself, look after your health. If I had 1 more hour a day, it would be to sleep more rather than recreate more. Look after the others that you care about and allow them to look after you. This is a hard road that we're taking, and we need to be sure that we're sustaining each other. Spend time in nature and look after nature, because it will bring you benefits. And of course, we need to be political with a small p as well as a big P. We are really engaged in a political issue. We have no choice about that. So lobby, protest. Your voice may be small, but it is a voice. Collectively, those voices are important, and education is one way in which we grow these voices. So my view of what I do is about forming citizens. The citizen as someone who can, if need be, refound his civilization. I think we are at that point, perhaps not just in the dramatic sense of global climate change, biodiversity loss, but in thinking about how the way we develop our societies, the way in which those societies work together, the way in which we view the future and what we value for our future. We can solve climate change, we can solve biodiversity loss, hopefully, but there is more. We need to think about what we envision for our society for the future. And finally, really, never doubt that you can do something. You may be a small group, but if you're thoughtful, committed citizens, you can change the world. And as Margaret Mead says, indeed, it's the only thing that ever has changed the world. So I wish you well in your journey, and whether I'm with you or not in person, I'll be with you in spirit. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'm really willing to take comments and questions now. Thank you very much for your attention.